right. So hello, everyone. My name is Andy Feiner, partner at PwC, and I'm here for 3 years now. In my previous life, I was in investment banking, but also set up a firm where Ina, who's also a representative of the panel, is working, and I'm deeply involved into data land at PwC. So the risk when you have such a panel on ESG data is that it's going to be super boring, because everybody agrees there is data gaps, there's quality issues, there is, the pricing issues, like some of the data providers are just taking a little bit too much money in order to kind of, get the services done. And if you then look into the corporate side has a big problem as well, and there were many corporates in the room here. So the corporates are receiving a lot of, requests from certain data providers, but also from their investors directly, which they then will have to answer. And this is something that we at PwC do a lot with those corporates. But this is not the topic in and of itself. But if you look at sustainability data, this is probably, comparable to, the financial data, how it came up after the Great Depression in 1929. You always need a big impetus. The companies and the regulators are taking something on like this. And, for us at the moment, it's obviously the planetary boundaries, it's, climate change, but it's also biodiversity, which is a big problem. So hence, the European Union has come up with a very good intention to come up with a lot of regulations for both investors, but also for corporates. We will discuss today whether that is a little bit, too far, how this has gone. So from that perspective, this is something that Ina will talk about. And we have another view as well, which is from Eric coming. Eric will say, we actually need that regulation. And then we have Simon in the middle, who is, looking more into the financial data as well. But let's look into, what is actually happening at the moment. And sustainability data is becoming audit relevant. And this is something that is quite important, because if it becomes audit relevant and there's some tagging required, the times to do this with a spreadsheet are basically over. So this means that a lot of companies are looking into their internal systems, and this requires a lot of investment. And for that, they need to look into a business case around sustainability data. So because today's compliance data will become the basis and the foundation for future green value creation. And that is kind of, the general outset that we have. But today's topic is about, the problems around data. So what we will do is we will look into, a little bit of a general overview. Is it right what is happening at the moment? We have, on purpose set up different views, because sometimes these ESG panels are kind of everybody agrees and, nobody remembers anything. So we'll have a little bit of a debate there. And then we'll look into the practicalities. And at the end, there will be Q&A. So you can, save your questions until the end. There's going to be about 10 minutes. But also, if you want to just dive right into this, you can raise your hand, and when I can see you with the slide, then I will pick those up. But without further ado, I'd like to have Ina, Simon, and Eric coming to the stage, and they will introduce themselves, and they will also have a little bit of a provocative statement. So over to you, Ina.
Hi, everyone. Really good to be here. The topic I would like to explore today, like Andy mentioned, is the overreach of sustainability regulation. I think it's very fitting. Today is Halloween. I think a lot of us in the room would agree there's no scarier topic than sustainability reporting. So definitely looking forward to diving into this area. And a little bit of background about myself. I'm a lawyer by training with over a decade of experience in sustainable finance, data, and technology. I hold a couple of advisory board positions in a sustainable asset manager and a German manufacturing company. So looking forward to exploring the different sides of the coin here. Over to Eric.
Yes, thank you, Ina. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Erik Breen. I'm heading up Dataland, and in a previous life I was institutional investor. Data can be indeed an extremely boring topic, but I always like to compare this also with cooking. If you want to have a great recipe on the table, you will need to start with the really dull ingredients, and as a cook you make something out of that. So what's wrong today with sustainable development, what's hindering sustainable development, is a lack of data. And that's why I think we need the data. The regulation will not be perfect, but we need it to speed up. And my only question always is, can we go faster?
Okay, thanks, Eric. My name is Simon Krieger. I'm representing WM Datenservice today. And WM Datenservice is the leading financial data provider in the financial industry. And my part of this medium-sized enterprise is that I'm responsible for the development of ESG data products. And as our clients are mainly financial institutions, I regularly speak to them, and they have a big need in collecting ESG data for financial instruments. So we always hear something about how challenging it is to be compliant with the CSRD. And it's rarely written that it's also hard to be compliant with, for example, the SFDR or the EU taxonomy. And that's why I'm saying that the need for for ESG data for financial instruments are underestimated, because from an investor side, the need for these data are very big.
Thank you so much, everyone. I mean, obviously, Simon, what you're talking about is super, super interesting. So when you look into what happened in the past, when SFDR came up and Article 6, 8, and 9 funds, for everybody that doesn't know it, is kind of an Article 8 fund is integrating of sustainability data, and Article 9 is basically also having a positive impact. And everybody was saying, okay, I'm 8 and 9. But then, probably a year after or 2 years after, what happened is that most of the funds actually returned that. And I think that is, testament to what you just said, to the data. So how can you actually fix that issue? So if you talk about that, because, it is a bit of a problem. Everybody wants it. Everybody wants to kind of show that sustainability assets are going up. But then the problem, as you just mentioned, is with the data. So what is your take on all of that?
Yes, great question. I mean, in 2022 and 2023, there was kind of a ESG hype train going straight to Europe, and nobody wants to miss it. So there were massive inflows in these Article 8 and 9 funds. And what we see as the time flies is that most of the investors have incredible challenges by being compliant with these regulations. How to fix it? I mean, we will see with the upcoming CSRD that the database, which are corporates for financial instruments, will increase. And as you said previously, that sustainability data is also audit relevant. We hope that we can get a better data quality just by providing ESG data which is audited and not anymore estimated.
Thank you so much. And this kind of leads me to another thing. So if you think about the strategy of the European Union, what they have been doing. So the strategy was basically to looking into the leverage points of the system, being banks, being it fund managers, also for the supply chain law, be it the purchasing managers within corporates. So they always wanted to have those guys that require a lot of data from companies, but then at the same time, the requirements for the companies to provide the data is stacked out in the future. So the estimations that you just said is obviously then something to bridge that gap, which was making a lot of people unhappy. But if I talk about your statement at the beginning, Ina, you said probably the European Union has taken it a little bit too far. So what's your view on this, and what are the arguments that you hear in the market which go into that direction?
I think nobody debates the importance of data transparency, of being able to truly combat greenwashing, which is also one of the objectives of the EU in issuing all of these regulations. The issue, however, is the fact that they are quite technocratic. If you look at some of the text of the EU taxonomy or the CSRD with 1,000+ data points, it's difficult to imagine actually the way companies would actually in reality have to comply with this. In terms of being able to report meaningfully on these data points without them being just a box-ticking exercise. That's one of the main concerns we have at the moment on how to ensure that companies are able to effectively comply with the regulations, but also at the same time make them actionable and integrate into a real day-to-day business strategy, which eventually should be the end goal of it. Another issue is the fact that the policymakers at the EU level weren't really connected to each other. So the key point is the investment community requires a certain data set, let's say to comply with SFDR. And the idea was that CSRD would ensure that all corporates report these SFDR relevant data points, which is actually not the case. So it comes to show you that the policymakers haven't really been in touch with each other to ensure they created a harmonized system. So a key point is that everyone is talking about interoperability. We need to ensure different frameworks and standards speak to each other. But in practice, this is very difficult to achieve. And we see companies really suffocating under the burden of all these regulations. So it's key that we find the right balance between what is required, what is material, and then we move forward from there. But of course, it's not a perfect world. It would take probably decades to arrive at a really efficient sustainability data ecosystem. And we are pretty much at the beginning, I have to say. But it's
Thank you so much. This is not something that people lightly say on a stage, so thank you so much for voicing this out, what many people are thinking and probably not expressing. But Eric, if I come to you into Dataland, obviously Dataland was set out to solve some of the data issues with gaps in quality and price and availability, but also for the corporates to have a way to talk to the capital markets and the financial markets as well. So you always keep saying let the data flow, and then if you can bring let your data flow in connection with your cooking analogy, that would be a nice way of starting you off here.
Yeah, well, let's agree we want to make a great dish. So, and then we always need sound ingredients. If we start out with lousy ingredients, it will be turning out a lousy dish. That's very easy. Data is not sexy, but it needs to be right. And the quality, there's a lot wrong with it. And I always hear people say data quality, and I always wonder what do they actually absolutely mean with that. So I distinguish 5 aspects of data quality. For investors, it's important it's comparable because they look at thousands of companies. They need to compare. Also for investors, it needs to be reliable. So that's your second aspect. Mostly for regulatory reporting, for compliance, for risk management, it needs to be complete. So those are 3 relatively well-known aspects. And the last 2 are most interesting. And they will become much, much more important. It's the timeliness, availability of that data point. If I have sustainability data influencing my business decisions, but I get it in 6 months' time, it's not helpful. So it needs to be there on time. And through the IFRS Foundation, there was a question: do companies need to report sustainability information, which is deemed material, according to the IFRS single materiality definition, and financial information at the same time? And from corporates, the overwhelming answer was yes, absolutely. And I agree. It was also voiced that that's probably one of the hardest things to do. So time is aspect number 4 and extremely important. The last point, the 5th point, is easy access. If I'm an investor or a bank or someone else who needs data, a lot of data, sustainability data typically sits outside a company that needs it. I do not go to 10,000 PDFs, look up historic numbers, put them in a spreadsheet. I want to have that ready at hand. And easy access means also that it should be more open and less costly. And that's where Dataland comes in. I will ask one question to the audience. It's, of course, a trick question, but I'll make it easier by making it multiple choice. Let's take a very simple assumption. One data point costs you €1. And I'll give each of you €100. How many data points can you buy? Easy, right? So I promise to make it easier, give you multiple choice. 20, 100, or 1,000. Who says 20 in this room? I see no hands. No. Who says 100? Yeah, a few hands go up. Good. Who says 1,000? There are a few hands there as well. Good. The trick, of course, is all answers are correct. And I will explain why. 20 is correct. Because what's the profit margin of a large data vendor these days? It's 80%, 80. So they will take your 100 euro, pocket 80 euro in their profit, and give you data for 20. If you go out and do it yourself, you can have the 100 data points. But if you work together as a collective, you can easily get up to 1,000. And that's what Dataland is about, bringing in a collective ecosystem. So I'll stop rambling there.
It was not rambling, it was, it was basically shameless marketing, but that was okay. So Simon, if you want to pick this up, obviously the investors have trouble of getting all of that data, but most of the investors are actually working with VM Daten at your end. Since you're now also entering the ESG space, what is it you guys are doing in order to solve the data gaps and solve the pricing issues and solve the comparability issues? So what is your claim to play there?
Just to make it clear, we are not a data collector, we are just a data distributor. So we often receive our ESG data directly from the source. And from a historical point of view, we knew that we have an excellent relationship to the issuers because we also issuing every financial product, regardless of ESG or not, in the DACH region. And how we can overcome with this is that we rarely speak to the issuers and say, hey, the investors raised the flag. For example, they have some checks in their systems. This value cannot be true. But in the end, it's always the case that from the issuer side, they are responsible for the data. And we as a data distributor, we are taking much care of the data quality, but we are not able to prove, okay, is this 250 megatons CO2 emissions right, or should it be 238? So and that's kind of trade-off and a bias we see right now, that it's hard to make quality checks for these ESG data. And that's where we say, hopefully, auditors will help to close the gap between the problem of the data quality and any more comparable data.
Okay, thank you. Inna, your firm has a corporate dashboard, and corporates can directly work with ESG book. Does this actually help to fix the quality problem and the availability problem? How does it work, and is there an interaction between your customers and the corporate directly?
A bit similar to Dataland, actually. We also want to encourage an ecosystem because we do believe that that is an essential part of fixing some of these market and regulatory failures we've discussed today. So with our solution, indeed, any of our partners or clients could reach out to a corporate to request data. The corporate then, in turn, has full control over who can see the data, so they can disclose it publicly or privately. And the idea is that if you are an investor, you don't have to send out 1,000 manual spreadsheets data requests. And if you're a corporate, you don't have to fill in 1,000 different manual questionnaires, but you can centralize it all in one place. I think it's definitely the use cases are diverse. So corporates can use then the analytics coming out of this to do peer benchmarking analysis and so forth, and the investors can integrate into their portfolio management process. And we can see it working quite well in practice. But again, it will be a journey for everyone involved. Everyone is streamlining these systems. Also, what we're trying to do is align all of these regulatory disclosures to make it easier. So to have this interoperability actually work in practice, because nobody wants to do 1,000 manual disclosures every year. Companies need to run a business. There have been also a lot of pushback and controversies around the EU Green Deal, that it hurts the EU companies' competitiveness. Of course, again, two sides of the coin. Transparency is important, data is important, but also we need to be mindful that companies are there primarily also to serve their customers. So yeah, hopefully we can enable that with technology, but there is definitely space in our view for a lot of other ecosystem players as well. So it's there will be a need for many solutions on the market.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And probably, whoever wants to pick it up from you guys, there is now a change in the European Union. There's a couple of new decisions to be done. Will it actually, lead to the fact that kind of, the regulation will be toned down, will be less and less and less? And what's your opinion on that? So if you can just kind of, start to talk about that.
Sure, maybe I can give it a start. I mean, we had the recent EU elections. There's a new incoming EU finance commissioner who has signaled actually that there might be a little bit of a revision in the implementation of these directives and regulations. She hasn't actually mentioned which ones, but I think the usual suspects are definitely there. CSRD, taxonomy, and so forth. We have also seen delays recently, specifically on the deforestation regulation, which was pushed back by a year. So the EU is caving in a little bit to corporate business pressure, which is, again, you could argue either way. But there's also across the pond the US election next week, which would, of course, have quite a big impact on the US policies regarding ESG and climate. So we're definitely holding our breath. And on the other hand, I mean, even if all these regulations are torn down, I think to Eric's point, I mean, there will always be the investor pressure. There will always be the demand for the data. So we are already on the pathway towards achieving momentum in the space. So with or without regulation, I think we are going to arrive at some kind of harmonized system, hopefully, but it will take time.
I also have a view on that, perhaps also to add to you, Ina. I think that if you look at companies, some of the companies already had a lot of data out there, and the right data also. And they didn't need legislation for that. It was already important to communicate how they created value. And it's the function, I think, for a corporate to see how they interact with their stakeholders. For a long time, for over 50 years, we've literally put a fence around a company, and we should stop that. We've created in the 60s an accounting concept, which was a leading concept, which was called enterprise value. Now, can you pick it up? No, you cannot. It's literally a virtual fence around a company. And in today's world, a company is not creating value within its boundaries, but it's creating value outside its boundaries with relations and with resources, which rightly now, this is integrated reporting language, has been picked up by the ISSB. They need to push that concept a bit further. But the interactions outside the company are much more important than only inside the company and only financial. So we need multi-capital thinking, multi-resource thinking, thinking in terms of relationship with your ecosystem. And we also need to think about how value is created. And for that, you need a lot of insights. And I'm not necessarily saying that the regulation with all the requests for the data will deliver that insight. But I think the push for looking outside the company, introducing concept of sustainability data and materiality will help to shape in a company the insights how they create value. We should break down those silos. And that's the core assumption, I think, behind integrated reporting and integrated thinking. And that's a stream I like, and I'm affiliated with that a lot. And it's actually also quite necessary to redefine the role of businesses in society. And that is where the regulation, I think, is very helpful. What I do not want, nor as an investor, nor as a corporate, and this probably also is not the intention of the EU, is to create a data lake with thousands of nothing saying data points. If I ask a CEO today, I wake him up at night, what's keeping you awake at night? Not me, but the 5 big topics within your company. He should be able to say that. And I'll bet that most of those topics are still on the internal side of the company and less on the outside. And that is what needs to change. So we need to build connections, and that's also a way of building ecosystem. One final point, coming back to an ecosystem, if you want to be a central hub in an ecosystem, connecting two-sided markets, multiple markets, if you want to be a platform that has power over what gets on the platform or not, if you want to have power to potentially earn fees and make it commercial, I think that's a wrong way of defining how you serve an ecosystem. If you want to be such a central place, it should be either having more open, non-profit characteristics, or it should be in the public domain. And that's why I'm very, very favorable of the idea of ESEP, which was born out of regulation. ESEP stands for the European Single Access Point, which is that 5th element, that single access point to data. Great idea. Execution, too little, too late. I'm very sorry, but the idea is very good. And Dataland, if you like, is your market-led initiative to do it today. We're here, we're operational, we're not perfect, but we're here. And we have those characteristics of a public, trusted element that can serve that function of a central hub. We are non-commercial, and that's an extremely important element. And the governance is led by a foundation here in Frankfurt.
Thank you so much. So probably, I think we now have 10 minutes after that for Q&A. Is that right? Or is the 3 minutes, until the, okay, so perfect. So you touched upon ESAP. And that's probably one of the most important questions, because people always say, once ESAP is there, like all the data quality, availability, costs and issues are done. So Eric, you just gave your reflections on this, but Simon, if you can, give your thoughts on ESAP, because that theoretically should put you out of business.
Yes, the ESAP, maybe just for the broad audience, the ESAP is the European Single Access Point, which was the idea to collect all public available information, regardless of ESG or other financial statements. And unfortunately, it was postponed till mid-27, and I guess ESG data will be integrated into early 28. But what we see from the ESAP is, of course, it is a great opportunity, but it's questionable if all the companies are really in the points Eric mentioned. Do they import the data in time? Is it quickly available? And then, of course, the ESAP is a great solution, but it's only European. And we, from an investor side, we often see, okay, great, asset management focused only on Europe does not work, it's globally. So if you want to invest as a fund into an enterprise located in Asia or in South America, you will always need the ESG information. And with the ESAP, you get a sort of a solution for the European market, but to deal with it in your whole process and to make ESG data provider obsolete, it won't work, because you will need always the data abroad from the EU.
Oh, thank you so much. And I think that is a very valid point, the European-centric setup of ISAP and, kind of, being, many years too late. So, Ina, anything that you would like to add on this topic before we open up for the questions?
Sure. I mean, we do hear a lot that the cost of sustainability data is going to go down to zero because of all these regulations, because of the fact that the data needs to be machine readable and accessible publicly to everyone. However, we also need to think about this is the cost to the end user of the data, but how about the cost to the originating entities? So this is, like I mentioned earlier, a very important point we need to keep in mind that companies are required to spend six-figure, seven-figure sums in producing these reports. And we need to think of how to make this data actionable, usable, and actually really material with all the debates around double materiality and so forth. So when we think about the cost of raw data going to zero, the cost for whom, and also the issue is that even if you have access to thousands of data points as an investor, what do you do with them? How do you compare the waste emissions of 1,000 companies, really? You need to put them in context. So that's why it's important to have these additional layers on top that would help you contextualize, analyze, and then introduce into meaningful investment decisions. So some food for thought there, just opening up.
No, I think it's a good point because, I mean, in the US with Edgar, the financial data was available for many decades now very easily and openly, but Bloomberg still made a lot of money out of, compiling this and giving context and other topics around that. But let me see whether we have any questions in the audience. So I see one is over here. Can you speak very loud or do we have a microphone?
Perfect, thank you. My name is Leonard Vermens. I work for the ESG and Sustainable Finance team of Commerzbank. And my customers are, thank you for mentioning, Mrs. Mashiva, this topic of the complexity of the data. So my customers are struggling with that. And my question is, are we not building in too much complexity? Or, if I look at the topics, it's really always about circularity, CO2 footprint, maybe how I treat my personnel, but it's like 5 topics. And in Europe, we're discussing CSRD over 1,000 different KPIs. So before we start organizing data layers and data access, do we need this much data, or what do we really, what's the core we can focus on? How little do we need?
Great question. Who wants to take this?
I would like to take that. I think you're spot on. And this is exactly the difference, I think, between regulation-driven and data gathering, where they say, well, this could all be important, and what a company really needs to drive its business. And there's, of course, very different motivations behind it. So it's also understandable. And I must admit, we're lucky because the original CSRD introduced over 2,000 data points. We're now just over 1,000. Still too much. I also think that it will be, with the political wind that we will be seeing in the next few weeks, probably go down a little bit. But we should also be very much aware that this also marks a trend. And typically, European politics starts out with ambition, otherwise you get nowhere. There's a little bit of pocket money already in each proposal. This is how this works. They can take it out, and then a somewhat watered down version will be implemented. And then when it's implemented, it will be even further watered down by practice. So if we get to 25% of what they're asking initially, I would already be thinking that's quite a lot and quite enough. This is not a compliance statement, of course. But I do believe business leaders that realize how they interact with the external world and can really articulate their value creation story already would have the most important metrics in place today. And that is what I want to see and what I want to hear. And the other side is I don't want to hear the legal talk, I don't want to hear the marketing talk, I want to hear the business talk, including negative impacts, please. And that's the latest twist we took, and one of the biggest ones in the update of Integrated Reporting Framework. We saw that a lot of people were following integrated reporting and making a great story out of it. But they were forgetting about the two-sided coin of impact it can also be negative. And you should first come clean on what that negative impact is before you can manage and steer it and take it away together with the ecosystem or balance it to others. One thing I must add, final point, is that we will see a lot more data because I can add up euros, yens, Swiss francs, US dollars, Canadian dollars, whatever dollars. I can add that up. I can also, with an interest rate structure, bring future dollars into the now. I cannot, and I've never met anyone who has been able to add up CO2 emissions, water usage, use of child labor, and so on, and so on, and so on. These are very different dimensions and very different metrics. And also the time element. I don't know whether avoiding a ton of CO2 today is better than avoiding 2 tons tomorrow. I cannot answer that question. Maybe someone can, but these are extremely complex systems. And we should be aware that we're not oversimplifying as well. So we do also need to recognize we need more data. That's the balance. Hope that answers your question.
Anybody else?
Maybe I would jump into it. What we see from a practical view is that a few years ago, there was like this intention, oh great, you have ESG data, give me everything you have. And in the last years, it pushed back to, okay, I know which data is relevant for me. So great, you have 600 data points in your database. I only need my 250. And the 250 Bank A requires could be a lot different to the other 250 Bank B would need. So what we see is that in the institutions as well, they have their processes and they need ESG data for different use cases, for example, for the investment process, but also for risk management and so on. And they predefined their need for the data. And then they see, okay, I need data point ABC. How do I get this?
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm just hoping we can hear maybe a couple more questions.
Exactly. Over here.
It was mentioned at the beginning that assurance of data or the CSRD will be a key player on data quality. So we will start with limited assurance. So at the beginning, most probably not deep dive on data, but then it should evolve on reasonable assurance. How do you see this regulation basically bringing value and quality and getting us where we should be with data quality?
I think probably one for you.
I mean, I can start a little bit, but I'm the moderator, but coming from PwC. So of course, like with financial data, before the Great Depression, everybody had their same recipe or the different recipes, and they collected the data and didn't really communicate this. And the same it was with sustainability data. Everybody had their way of calculating, let's say a gender pay gap. There's multiple ways of doing this. Now people would like to streamline this, although the regulation is very vague still. There's no recipe in the regulation how to actually do it. But still with the assurance process, there will be, some convergence in these things. And of course, you can't go in there at day one and say, now we go full assurance, and that just would put too much of a burden on the company, which is already very high with sustainability data. So I firmly believe, in the same thing, and just looking how financial data, the quality has improved, the same will happen to sustainability data. And it will also be less and less sustainability data. If you look at the CSRD, everyone brings the 1,000 data points, but since companies have to check which are the material topics for them, the actual amount of data points the companies are reporting is much less. So to your question, yes, it will bring quality to it. It will be probably a decade that we need in order to get that done. And then after that, there will be still problems with data quality. As you can see in financial data points, there's still problems, although there's heavy fines and full assurance of these data points, there will still be problems because there's kind of ways how you can choose A or B and how you calculate that. So it will get better. There will never be a perfect situation, and I don't think that we need a perfect situation. We need some focus on these topics, on the most material ones, because the topics of climate change and most important biodiversity, we need to get this into the thinking of companies. I fully believe that this is the right way where the European Union goes, but I'm sitting with Ina, on your chair basically, like it's too much. And if we talk to, corporates that we are supporting in collecting all of that information and, getting them ready, they are unable to basically do all of these things. And it takes away, airtime from their business as well. So from that perspective, I hopefully this will get less and less and less and find a right balance. And then kind of with assurance, I think we have a nice additional data set to the financial data, their sustainability data, which is, to Eric's point, bring it a little bit to the outside of the fence that you just mentioned, basically. So I'm looking at the time. Probably, I don't know if we can have one last question, if there is one. If not, we are basically very grateful for your time, for your interest.
Oh, okay.
There's one
Can
question.
you hear me? I have a question. Hello. Yes.
Sorry.
Okay. My name is Sanam, and I just want to know that your opinion about technology like AI, machine learning, NLP, how this technology can be leveraged to improve the quality of ESG data.
There's a lot to unpack here. We need another 5 minutes. I'm sorry. You go first.
Yeah, maybe I can start. From I think everything we heard today, the manual processes are out, right? We need technology to actually humanly manage all of this tsunami of sustainability data requests, analysis, and so forth. So it will be a crucial element. Again, with AI, the key point is reliability, like we have discussed probably in many other channels. The models are improving exponentially, but the reliability of using a purely AI-driven approach would also need to be tested over time. Who knows? They might take over all of our jobs in a few decades, but what we still see is that the combination between human and machine interaction is probably the best of both worlds.
Yeah, quick reaction, 3 words. Word 1, it's extremely helpful. It helps us to cut through data quicker and easier. Second word, it needs interaction. Interaction is the word there. With the human eye and the humans. You cannot let it go alone. And that's specifically for the interpretation. Last word, and that's the extremely important one, is transparency. We don't want to build black boxes. So if AI finds the data point 5 and we put it on Dataland, you can click on the number 5 and you can see it. Here is the report from the company, and there's your number 5 sitting in that report. And that transparency, I think, is crucial.
Thank you so much. Any final words?
I would just mention that with the technology, we could eliminate the human errors, which is in the reporting. So, for example, if you're collecting the data and going manually through all the sustainability reports, AI will lead to faster access to the data because it's much faster than doing it with a human. And hopefully, if the AI is good, we will have an increase in the data quality as well.